If you garden in your backyard, there's a few things you're going to want to know to maximize your space and get the most out of your garden. In this video, I'm sharing with you my best backyard gardening tips that I have learned over years of backyard gardening. Let's go. Hey guys, welcome back to Mini Urban Farm, a channel about gardening and homesteading in the suburbs. My name is Veronica and I teach people how to garden in the suburbs, in an urban environment, in small spaces, all of that. If that sounds good, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. In today's video, I am covering things that you need to know when backyard gardening, my best backyard gardening tips, starting with the layout. Alright, as you can see, I have my raised bed gardens right behind me, and the placement of this was definitely not an accident. Alright, I'll show you a wide shot of my current backyard, and you can see that the garden is pushed all the way up against the fence. That is because we have a dog and we have kids and we need a place to actually play. It is also because we took into account the lighting and the water and where we're going to put the trellis and all of that stuff. Alright, so one of the first things that you're going to want to consider when starting a backyard garden is to put it in a spot that works for you and works for the garden also. Alright, don't put it in a spot that gets absolutely no light, that's absolutely shaded out, and that doesn't actually get any rainwater when it rains. Make sure the layout works for you before you implement your garden, and it'll save you tons of headache down the road. Alright, so the next thing that you need to consider is how the plants grow. Alright, so you can see I have a whole bunch of bush beans here, but behind them I have my cherry tomatoes, and they're currently attached to and growing up this trellis. Alright, the same thing with my cucumbers over here, and then I have another cucumber plant over there, and then some bush tomatoes on that side. I have some scallions, some kale, and then I also in the cooler months have a lot of root crops. Alright, which means that they go underneath the ground, things like carrots and radishes, beets, that sort of thing. Alright, you're going to want to know how each plant grows in order to determine where you want to put it in the garden. It's not an accident that these cherry tomatoes here are growing up a trellis, alright, because they need the trellis space. I purposefully planted them on the back side where my trellis space is. I have this huge trellis that goes 30 feet from one side of the garden bed to the complete opposite side of the garden bed, and anything that needed a trellis I put on the trellis. You're not going to be able to do that if you don't know how each plant grows. So these type of tomatoes are indeterminate tomatoes, which means that they're vining and they grow up a trellis. The same thing with these cucumbers here. These are not bush cucumbers. You have vining cucumbers, but if I were to have planted bush cucumbers, they wouldn't have grown up this trellis, which means I was going to lose all of that trellis space where I could have planted something else that required it. So know what type of plant grows which way. The same thing applies to bush beans and pole beans, and there's a whole bunch of different varieties of different types of vegetables that will grow certain ways, and you're going to want to know which types those are and where to plant them in your garden. The same thing is true with knowing how much space each plant is going to require. Not only do you want to know how it is that they're growing, either up or down or whatever, but you're going to want to know how much space that they are going to take up. So as you can see behind me, all of these bush beans, you can plant them out at 6 or 9 bean plants per square foot, which gives you a lot in a little space. But I'm going to overlay one of my Brussels sprout plants that took up about 3 or 4 square feet itself. Alright, the same thing with zucchini plants, and a lot of these bigger brassicas, they take up a lot of space. So you don't want to plant 4 of them in 1 square foot because they're really not going to do well. You really want to know how much space each plant needs so you can give it the appropriate amount of room, because that is going to help you get the biggest harvest. If you have 10 tomato plants in one little small area, you're not going to get a ton of tomatoes. But I can harvest tomatoes from all of my plants because they're all doing well and they all have the amount of space that they need. The same thing applies over here to which plants you want to keep in containers. Alright, this is my spearmint plant, and I have this in a little container over here. It is not in my raised bed garden because mint will spread. Alright, so if you have something like this, you really don't want it to take over your garden, alright, unless that's what you want. If you want to grow a ton of mint and it just continue growing without end, without limits, then by all means plant it in your raised bed, but I don't want that, so I'm gonna just leave it in this container, and then I can harvest from it whenever I want. I can plop up the leaves, alright, and it will just continue to grow in here. This is gonna get nice and big and bushy, and in fact it's grown a ton since I planted it in here about a month ago. But you can see it has these little runner vine things which are already trying to spread, and if I let it grow and let it spread, it will do exactly that. Things like mint and thyme, even strawberries, things that have runner vines, you're going to want to plant them in a container like this, alright, even if it's a big container, but you want to have them for lack of a better word, contained. Alright, so I just came under the little covered patio area here because it is starting to drizzle, so hopefully it'll stop in a minute. But I do want to share with you guys that I have an entire gardening checklist. It is a free download on how to start your dream vegetable garden in 8 simple steps. Alright, if that is something you're interested in, I will leave that in the description bar below. But the next one that I want to share with you guys for our backyard gardening tips is to plant what you like to eat. And I know this probably sounds a little bit like common sense, but believe me, it is definitely not, alright? When you go to the gardening center and you see all of these pretty things, all of these, bright, shiny, new plants, you're gonna want everything in sight, alright? So take it from me, plant out what you like to eat, plant out things that your family likes to eat, because I can harvest 1,000 rows of radishes, but at the end of the day, if they go in the compost pile because the kids and my husband does not like eating radishes, then it was kind of a waste. Now, I like radishes, but I can only plant a certain amount before I can't eat them anymore. So if you like eating something, make sure you're planting an appropriate amount if no one else likes eating it. And if it's something that you're trying out for the first time, maybe plant 1 or 2 of them, don't plant 1,000 of them. Alright, grow what you like to eat and you'll get the most out of your garden. Alright, so the next one we have over here, and you can see Milo just hanging out with us, is to set up some sort of sprinkler system or drip irrigation system. Now in my previous garden I had a drip irrigation system which went inside the beds, alright, and provided a nice drip line to all the plants, and spoiler alert, I will be setting up something like that in this garden very shortly, so if you want to watch that, don't forget to subscribe. But for the time being, I have this sprinkler system, and it's basically just like, I think it was only a couple bucks at the gardening center, and it is attached to this hose which is set up on this timer over here. You can see it is on auto. I can adjust the date, the time, the duration. It's set to come on 7:30 a.m. and 8 p.m. every single day for 20 minutes, and it just does that on repeat, and I don't have to come in here and water by hand. Now, of course, watering by hand is still an effective way of watering your plants and getting your plants the nutrients that they need. However, when I go on vacation, when I want to sleep in, when I simply forget, when I don't want to have to come out here, in the heat of the summer or whatever it is, the manual watering kind of gets a little bit tedious, alright, which is where a drip irrigation line or a sprinkler system or something comes into play. Now, a drip irrigation line is definitely much better because you can control the kind of emitters and sprinklers and sprayers that you have on it, alright. A sprinkler system like the one I have here just kind of sprays all the plants, and that might not always be the best for every type of plant that don't like overhead watering. However, it's still better than forgetting to water your plants, and since it's still saving me the time and effort that it takes to actually come out here every single day, sometimes twice a day, to hand water everything, it's definitely worth it. Alright, and so for my last tip, it is going to be to maximize all of the space that you potentially have in your garden, alright? You can see I have my tomatoes trellising, I have my beans right there, I even have some parsley and basil and herbs tucked up in between these plants in like a companion-like fashion, alright, that they are helping to, make the plants better and get more food out of this space. So I would encourage you, if your goal is to grow food for your family in your backyard, in the suburbs, alright, try to maximize as much space as you have, even if that's just a couple of raised garden beds like I have behind me, or if you have a bigger area, still try to get as much food in there as possible, because it is just going to go wasted if you don't actually use it. Maximize your space. I will show you how to do that in this video over here. I talk all about companion planting, growing vertically, and square foot gardening. Don't forget to check that out, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!